I won't bury the lead. Space Marine 2 provides the most authentic and fun feeling of being a Space Marine that I have ever experienced, and is easily one of the best games released in 2024. Developed by Saber Interactive and published by Focus Entertainment for PlayStation 5, Xbox Series X and S, and for PC, Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2 is a third-person shooter and hack-and-slash game, and the long-awaited sequel to the 2011 cult classic, promising to immerse players in the grim-dark future of the 31st millennium, and it certainly delivered on that promise. But as always, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. Set during the Indomitus Crusade over a century after the events of the first game, Space Marine 2 follows Lieutenant Demetrian Titus of the Ultramarines. Having recently crossed the Rubicon Primaris to become a Primaris Marine, Titus is tasked with defending the Residius system from a Tyranid invasion, where he uncovers a sinister plot involving the Thousand Sons Traitor Legion and an ancient weapon of immense power. Of all mechanics, the key and obvious focus in Space Marine 2 is combat, and rightly so, considering that the game's entire premise is that it's an action-packed experience where the player is put in the shoes of a near-demigod war machine with the effective and glorious ethics of a flamethrower pointing at a snake pit. Combat is impactful, visceral, and immensely satisfying, and Space Marine 2's greatest strength is the pure, unadulterated power fantasy it provides by having players burn, blast, and soar a path through waves of smaller enemies just to get through heavier, more specialist enemy types, just to get through more. At its core, the game implements a blend of ranged and melee combat. You're always equipped with both a ranged weapon and a melee option, and the genius lies in how freely you can switch between them. Each melee weapon has a short list of combos, with each maneuver being useful in commonly recurring but specific situations. Every swing of your chainsword carries appropriate weight, and the same goes for every other melee weapon you can equip. And the game does an excellent job of communicating impact through both visual and audio feedback. When enemies are staggered, you can perform brutal finishing moves called executions that are visually satisfying and also serve as useful tactical decisions. During an execution, for example, you're invulnerable until the animation ends, making them a valid strategy for surviving overwhelming odds. However, you're also committed to the animation, meaning poor timing can leave you vulnerable to other threats once you've finished ripping the throat out of your nearest opponent. Ranged combat also deserves equal attention. Your bolt gun isn't just a standard weapon, it's been implemented with proper respect for the source material. Each shot delivers a satisfying impact, with ammunition that detonates after penetration, just as it should. The weapon sound design sells every one of those shots with a distinct double crack, really selling the weapon's power and strengthening the game's level of immersion. Heavy weapons, which end up excelling at crowd control or dealing with some of the larger, tougher opponents, all maintain that feeling of raw power that Space Marine weapons should deliver, while also maintaining a level of balance and challenge. But when in doubt, grab a melter gun. Melter guns turn hordes into puddles. The health and armor system is also done with a different approach. Rather than implementing a standard regenerating health system, Space Marine 2 uses a dual-layer approach that feels both tactical and lore-appropriate. Your armor can regenerate relatively quickly, representing the power armor's repair systems, but your actual health requires more strategic management, especially at higher difficulty levels and when facing more challenging encounters. This creates interesting tactical decisions during combat. Do you press forward aggressively to finish off enemies and regenerate armor? Or do you fall back, take cover, and protect your remaining health?
The answer every time is to go forth killing all your enemies until your final breath, because the Emperor protects.
The movement system in Space Marine 2 balances the literal weight of a Space Marine with the need for tactical mobility. Your character moves with appropriate mass, and you feel like you're controlling a genetically enhanced warrior in power armor and not a lightweight action hero. This design allows for movement that carries momentum and communicates weight without feeling sluggish. When you start moving, there's a brief moment of acceleration, and when you stop, you feel the mass of the armor. What's most important to the player is that these aren't impediments to gameplay. They're carefully calculated design decisions, and they enhance immersion while maintaining playability to a very high degree. During combat, the movement system reveals a bit more additional depth. The dodge mechanism, while limited, feels appropriate for a Space Marine. There is no acrobatics, just methodical sidesteps and an encouraged reliance on the parry system and executions for tactical repositioning and demolition, and the ever-present dodge roll. This limitation isn't really a weakness in the design, it's a conscious choice, and it enforces proper tactical thinking and adds an extra layer of challenge and, quite frankly, immersion for the player. When you're engaged in melee combat, there's a subtle auto-facing mechanism that helps maintain the flow of combat and movement while wading through often literal piles of corpses without feeling like it's taking control away from the player. The interaction with environments shows similar attention to detail. When you're moving through tight corridors, you feel the size and presence of your armor compared to the enclosed space. And this is equally seen when you're in dialogue with Imperial Guard troops and you see the real-world size difference between a Space Marine and a normal human soldier. Transitioning between different elevation levels also carries appropriate weight. Even simple actions like turning maintain a sense of mass without sacrificing responsiveness or making it feel like you're controlling a tank. Space Marine 2 features an array of enemies categorized into 4 main types: Minoris, Majoris, Extremis, and Terminus. The Tyranids serve as the primary antagonists for much of the game, both in the campaign and in operations mode, and as a faction, the Tyranids prioritize overwhelming the player with sheer numbers. The second major enemy faction is the Forces of Chaos, specifically the Thousand Suns. This traitor legion represents a different style of threat, and in contrast to the Tyranid swarming tactics, Chaos enemies tend to be more durable and tactically demanding on an individual basis. Overcoming them requires a bit more strategic thinking and adaptability, as their corrupted nature often imbues them with abilities that make them a real threat to the player. Minoris-type Tyranid enemies, while individually weak, can swarm the player and break through defenses if not managed carefully. Majoris enemies, which represent a step up in an individual threat level from those Minoris types, often appear alongside those smaller enemies, bolstering their ranks. What makes them particularly dangerous is that they possess the ability to summon reinforcements, making them priority targets. Extremis enemies mark an even more significant spike in difficulty, demanding tactical adaptations from the player. These enemies exhibit unique behaviors and abilities that set them apart from the more common Minoris and Majoris types, and in operations mode, defeating an Extremis enemy triggers a notification that gives credit to the player who landed the finishing blow, acknowledging the achievement. At the apex of the enemy hierarchy are the Terminus enemies, which function as bosses. These adversaries typically appear at the climax of specific missions, serving as formidable capstone challenges. While in operations mode, Terminus enemies appear only rarely and exclusively at high threat levels, reflecting their status as the ultimate test of a Space Marine's combat prowess. The customization system in Space Marine 2 demonstrates thoughtful integration of both aesthetic and progression elements. The game's armoring hall serves as the central hub for personalizing your Space Marine, offering a comprehensive suite of options that respect both player expression and canonical accuracy. Each Astartes chapter brings its own distinct visual identity through unique decals, color schemes, and armor variants. The game achieves an impressive balance between a level of authenticity and personalization. You can create fairly unique combinations without breaking the established visual language of the Warhammer 40,000 universe. The progression system for unlocking armor sets showcases careful consideration of player engagement, but can also be a little bit daunting. The requirement for players is to complete 35 missions or matches for each class's final armor set, and it creates meaningful long-term goals. And the class-specific armor progression does encourage players to explore different play styles, while ensuring that earned customization options reflect genuine achievement and dedication. However, there isn't quite enough of a variety for long-term engagement for this level progression. And for those players who don't have the time or the luxury of time to put in for that level of progression, they're not going to see any value in it. Eternal War's faction-specific armor sets maintain a inappropriate visual appeal. However, the decision to limit those sets to one per class is quite restrictive, and I would have liked to see just as many Chaos Marine options to provide another incentive for playing through PvP game modes. The weapon customization system creates a fairly rewarding progression system that maintains gameplay relevance. The approach ensures that aesthetic customization remains connected to player achievement rather than just paid for cosmetic collections. The campaign mode's more limited customizations options for Titus reflect a conscious design choice that prioritize narrative consistency, and while the limitation does serve the storytelling and maintains character integrity, I would have again liked to see more options for the player to be able to use. Level design in Space Marine 2 takes a deliberately linear approach. Each area has been crafted to serve multiple purposes: narrative progression, combat spaces, and environmental storytelling, all working in concert. For the most part, the linear nature of the levels enhances the combat experience by providing just enough challenging spaces and obstacles, and generally plenty of room to move when you're not being inundated with enemies. Encounters are fairly carefully paced, with each arena designed to test different aspects of your combat capabilities, and early areas gradually introduce new combat challenges, building on complexity and difficulty as you progress. The combat arenas themselves are again fairly well thought through, if somewhat unimaginative. These more open areas are constructed battle arenas with height variations, cover positions, and approach vectors, all being placed with clear intent. Placement of columns, barriers, and other environmental features do create these natural flow patterns that encourage dynamic combat and movement without feeling too artificial, but the majority of the time, you'll be far too busy being glorious and deadly to pay the most attention. Resource distribution throughout levels also shows similar thoughtfulness. Ammunition, health, and other opportunities, as well as tactical positions, are placed to reward a certain amount of exploration while maintaining momentum. This adds to that natural ebb and flow to combat encounters and prevents both resource scarcity and its excess, meaning that players will have to sometimes make decisions to risk using an item, but won't have to go for too long before being able to pick up another one. Operations is Space Marine 2's 3-player co-op PvE mode that allows you to form squads, undertake repeatable missions, and progress your characters. Each squad can include 3 of the 6 classes, with no duplicates allowed. These are structured missions that take place in parallel to the main campaign and represent the actions of other Space Marines, operating and completing objectives that support the action of Titus and his squad. They offer varying difficulty levels that significantly alter gameplay experience. At higher difficulties, you're not just facing tougher enemies and bullet sponges. You're facing tougher enemies, bullet sponges, you're dealing with reduced healing effectiveness, limited ammunition, and stricter execution windows. The game offers 6 distinct classes for use in both operations and PvP, each fulfilling specific tactical roles, while maintaining the core Space Marine power fantasy. The tactical class serves as a versatile backbone for any squad, equipped with an Auspex scan ability that highlights enemy positions and weak points, and not just as a simple spotting mechanic, it's a useful tactical tool that can turn the tide of battle when used correctly. The Assault class exemplifies aggressive close combat specialization. The player is equipped with a jump pack and can rapidly close distances and engage with enemies with devastating melee weapons. The mobility options here aren't just for show, they create genuine tactical advantages while requiring skill to use effectively. The timing of a jump attack can mean the difference between a successful assault and a quick death. Vanguard specialists bring unique mobility options through their grappling launchers. This creates quite interesting vertical gameplay opportunities, allowing for quick repositioning and flanking maneuvers. The class itself serves as an excellent counter to static defensive positions, and is good for keeping matches dynamic and engaging. The Bulwark class demonstrates how defensive play can be as engaging as aggressive tactics. Players are armed with a shield and powerful support abilities. These specialists are highly useful for holding critical positions and can provide rally points for their squad mates. Using the banner system creates interesting tactical decisions about positioning and team coordination, and the Bulwark class tends to be the center of any good squadron. Long-range specialists in the Sniper class offer more than just precision shooting. Their ability to cloak and maintain distance adds a layer of tension to every engagement. Enemy teams must constantly consider the threat of hidden snipers, leading to more thoughtful positioning and movement. The heavy class rounds out the roster with superior firepower and crowd control capabilities. Their ability to deploy barriers can also create interesting tactical opportunities, especially in objective-based game modes when done in tandem with the Bulwark class abilities. The heavy weaponry at their disposal also feels appropriately powerful while maintaining game balance. The game mode itself is centered around a robust progression system for both classes and weapons, and is quite frankly a better progression system than you would have in the main campaign. And it's something I would have liked to see in the campaign, or some way to play campaign missions co-op with characters that can use that progression system. But I digress. Completing these missions grants XP to level up classes, unlock class perks, as well as higher tier weapon variants. Class progression itself revolves around unlocking and equipping perks. There are 25 perks per class, with the first being a signature ability. These perks are arranged into columns, and only one perk per column can be active at a time, allowing up to 8 to be equipped: 3 gear, 3 core, 1 team, and 1 signature, creating a way for the player to access build variety and playstyle customization. Unlocking perks requires both reaching the appropriate level and spending requisition points earned from missions. Weapons have their own upgrade paths. The 14 primary weapons, the 3 secondary weapons, and 5 melee weapons can all be improved from standard to master crafted to artificer and to relic. These require weapon XP that you gain from use. Armory data can also be found during missions to unlock tiers, and requisition to purchase. Individual weapon perks are then unlocked using mastery points, earned by maximizing weapon XP. Eternal War is Space Marine 2's 6v6 PvP mode, where you fight for either the loyal Adeptus Astartes or treacherous Chaos Heretics across 3 distinct game types. First is Annihilation, which is the team deathmatch mode. Its objective is for players to reach 50 takedown points before the enemy team. Second is Seize Ground, which is the domination mode. Players will need to control a moving zone to earn points to the target score. Finally, you have Capture and Control, the King of the Hill game mode, which requires players to hold 3 static zones to be the first to the score limit. Progression in Eternal War is quite streamlined. Completing matches earns veterancy levels and requisition points. Veterancy is shared across classes and unlocks weapons for use in PvP. Importantly to note, the perks and weapon upgrades earned in operations do not carry over to Eternal War for balance reasons. However, all cosmetic customization options are shared between game modes. With its straightforward advancement, focus on direct competition, and equalized perk system, Eternal War provides a level playing field to test your skill against other players, but doesn't seem to have a greater offer to the player when it comes to long-term engagement or competitive play. Space Marine 2's visual presentation serves quite well at bringing the Warhammer 40,000 universe to life. The game's lighting creates atmospheric depth that enhances every environment, from the oppressive darkness of corridor firefights to the grand scale of Gothic cathedral spaces. The attention to detail in armor modeling and texturing is also particularly noteworthy. Every piece of power armor you see various character wears shows intricate detail work, battle damage, purity seals, and chapter markings, all rendered with precision. The wear patterns on armor plates tell stories of countless battles, while ceremonial decorations maintain their pristine appearance, exactly as they should for treasured chapter relics. Enemy design demonstrates equal attention to detail. The Tyranid swarms show appropriate biological horror, with chitinous plates and alien musculature moving in unsettling but believable ways. The corruption they bring to Imperial architecture creates a striking visual contrast. Organic horror overwhelming ordered Gothic architecture in a way that perfectly captures the existential threat that they represent. Combat visuals maintain this high standard. Muzzle flashes from bolt weapons illuminate their surroundings with appropriate intensity. Chainsword impacts throw sparks and viscera in physics-appropriate arcs. These aren't just visual flourishes, they're well-implemented effects that enhance combat feedback while maintaining good visual clarity during intense encounters. Pretty as it can be, the game's visual fidelity serves a greater purpose than mere spectacle. When you're facing down hordes of Tyranids, every detail matters, and the devs did a great job creating atmospheric environments that shift from that Gothic grandeur of Imperial architecture to the bioorganic horror of Tyranid infestations, grounding the player in the world and making you feel the weight of every step. and every bolt fired. Continuing with the obvious golden thread I'm weaving through this review, the audio design in Space Marine 2 demonstrates exceptional attention to both detail and authenticity, while truly selling the impact in a way that makes every hit feel satisfying, regardless of what weapon you use. Bolt weapons produce a signature 2-stage crack, chainswords rev with appropriate menace, and the weapon sounds change based on whether you're cutting through armor or flesh. The environmental audio creates a convincing sense of space. Moving from tight corridors to vast cathedral chambers produces appropriate acoustic changes. Distant battles echo realistically, creating a sense of a larger conflict beyond your immediate engagement. Dialogue implementation also shows similar technical care. For example, the Voxcaster effects on helmeted speech are filtered versions of clean audio engineered to meet the sound characteristics we would think of military comms. And the difference between helmeted and bareheaded dialogue creates subtle but important variations in character presence in any scene. The story follows Lieutenant Demetrian Titus, formerly the captain of the Ultramarine 2nd Company, who during the liberation of Graia campaign was imprisoned by Inquisitor Thrax due to unexplained resistance to Chaos powers. After being tortured for answers he couldn't provide, Titus spent over a standard century imprisoned until he was finally cleared of Chaos taint. Following his release, Titus served in the Death Watch as a Black Shield under the name Nullius, concealing his identity, and after his service he returned to the Ultramarines, but received a significant demotion. The current conflict in the game begins when a tendril of the Tyranids High Fleet Leviathan invades the Imperial Residius system in the Segmentum Pacificus. Archmagus Nozick Beta 12 of the Adeptus Mechanicus calls for aid to defend Kadaku, a jungle world where he oversees the mysterious Project Aurora. Titus, now serving alongside Sergeant Gadriel and Brother Chiron, aids the Astra Militarum forces fighting off the Tyranid infestation, leading to a mission where they must retake orbital defense cannons. It is during this mission where events take a turn, when Nozick's Thunderhawk mysteriously crashes in Tyranid territory, and upon investigation, they discover Nozick wasn't killed by Tyranids, but by the forces of chaos. And it is from this point that Titus and his squadron are now facing an older and greater enemy. The character development in Space Marine 2 demonstrates remarkable subtlety. The personal conflicts within the squad arise less from just surface-level disagreements and more about their position within the Legion. For instance, Gadriel's uncertainty about Titus stems from his own background and ability to command, which creates a level of tension that feels authentic to a military hierarchy. Without providing spoilers, I can tell you that the resolution and growth from these conflicts are fairly well-paced and satisfying, if also fairly simple. Each of these characters do have individual arcs, and it is all woven fairly well together with the central plot. This adds another layer of immersion and engagement for the player beyond just the excellent gameplay. But for 40k fans in particular, it's going to provide a key area of enjoyment because they add to the details and simulation of not only being a Space Marine, but being a named character during very interesting times in one of the greatest grimdark universes the world has ever known. The setting itself serves as a vehicle for lore delivery, which for most isn't going to matter, but for 40k fans matters the most. And the game creates a really good sense of scale appropriate to the 40k universe. The game's commitment to Warhammer 40,000 authenticity manifests in almost every aspect. It very quickly establishes its setting credentials, particularly in its presentation of Space Marines as demigods in armor, and the attention to canonical detail extends to things like equipment and markings. The game's integration of 40k lore shows remarkable depth, from the more obvious visual elements like Gadriel's red helmet, which traditionally signifies squad leadership within the Ultramarines, to more specific details, such as how different Marines' armor tells stories of their position within the Legion, their military history, and their accolades. The game's handling of the Imperium's religious aspect also deserves special mention. Space Marines treat their weapons as almost religious objects, viewing them as symbols of the Emperor's might, and this is often conveyed through subtle character interactions rather than heavy-handed exposition. And the ritualistic nature of Space Marine operations is also woven quite naturally into the narrative, from the way characters handle their weapons to how they approach combat, Every action reflects centuries of tradition and indoctrination, and it feels very organic rather than forced. The character performances in Space Marine 2 demonstrate a thorough understanding of how Space Marines should carry themselves. Every movement, every gesture conveys the weight of centuries of training and combat experience. Characters maintain proper military bearing even in informal situations. There is no millennial dialogue or unnecessary whimsy. These Space Marines don't engage in melodramatic speeches or unnecessary Whedonism to lighten any moment with gravitas. Every line is delivered with appropriate gravity and emotional range. Combat dialogue shows similar attention to detail. Squad communications remain professional and efficient, even in the most intense firefights. And the voice actors maintain appropriate intensity without resorting to action movie cliché or caricature, and they create a convincing portrayal of highly competent, genetically engineered warriors who have seen countless battles, rather than unblooded soldiers experiencing combat for the first time. Titus deserves special mention. His portrayal perfectly balances the stoic nature of a Space Marine with the subtle hints of the personality that has caused him both glory and trouble throughout his service. The performance successfully captured the complexity of a warrior who maintains absolute loyalty to the Emperor, but who occasionally struggles with the rigid structures and doctrines of the Imperium, all the while understanding perfectly well why those things need to exist. Because chaos is very real in the world of 40k, and there is only the final solution. While surprisingly well written, the game's story isn't any sort of masterpiece, and mostly exists to provide a narrative framework and setting to make the highly engaging gameplay more interesting, and to create an emotional investment in the player. What makes Space Marine 2's storytelling a particularly fresh experience compared to many other media offerings today is its nuanced handling of professional military relationships, and I personally praise what I would describe as the professional dichotomy between the characters' actual actions compared to their desired action, told through dialogue, facial expressions, and visual storytelling. For example, Gadriel's relationship with Titus presents a complex interpersonal tension without compromising military bearing or unit cohesion, and the writers demonstrated remarkable understanding of how human conflict works within professional and hierarchical environments. Gadriel clearly distrusts Titus, yet this manifests through controlled professional behavior rather than outright insubordination. He maintains his duty to watch his battle brothers' backs, while harboring legitimate concerns about his leader's ability to command. The dialogue deserves some praise for its efficiency and authenticity. Every line serves a purpose, whether advancing the plot or revealing character information through carefully chosen words. Alright, it's time to sum up and summarize. Warhammer 40,000 Space Marine 2's primary strength lies in its combat system's integration of ranged and melee combat, creating a visceral experience that perfectly captures the essence of being a Space Marine. The weight and impact of each movement and attack demonstrates exceptional attention to detail while providing that visceral and impactful gameplay experience. The health and armor systems encourage aggressive yet tactical gameplay that feels authentic to the source material and delivers on an epic power fantasy. The game maintains impressive frame rates even at maximum settings, while the lighting and detail work on armor and environments create an immersive atmosphere. The sound design, particularly the implementation of Voxcaster effects and weapon sounds, show remarkable attention to detail and dedication to player immersion. The narrative presentation deserves some praise for its handling of military dynamics and professional relationships, with interactions between characters feeling genuine while avoiding common modern storytelling tropes in favor of authentic behavior. The environmental storytelling and attention to Warhammer 40,000 lore elements will satisfy even the most dedicated fans. The multiplayer component provides substantial depth through its class system and varied game modes, though I do worry about longevity for these life servants aspects, as they are a bit of a concern. All that being said, there are also areas where improvements can be made. The weapon loadout system occasionally shows inconsistencies during level transitions, forcing players to reconfigure their preferences and creating unnecessary friction in an otherwise smooth experience. The linear level design, while serving the narrative and general gameplay experience fairly well, does limit replay value and therefore limit longevity. Despite its flaws, Space Marine 2 ultimately succeeds in delivering an authentic Space Marine experience, while maintaining engaging gameplay mechanics. It demonstrates that attention and care for source material and solid game design are not mutually exclusive. The few technical issues and design limitations it has are minor compared to the overall achievement in bringing the Warhammer 40,000 universe to life in such a gory and fun fashion. For franchise veterans, this is the Space Marine experience that respects your expectations and your wallet. For newcomers, it serves as an impressive introduction to the grim darkness of the far future and is well worth a buy, even if you wait to grab it on sale. Feel free to leave your thoughts and feedback in the comments below. I always appreciate it, and it really does help me make something you trust and value to give you as much useful analysis and information as possible when you're planning to buy and play a new video game with your hard-earned money. Hit the subscribe button, maybe even the bell button, and whichever thumb you think the video deserves. And as always, my people, take care of yourselves.